Yesterday was November 11th, 2021, Veterans Day, originally known as Armistice Day, set up to celebrate the signing of the treaty after World War I to honor the veteran of World War I, and then later changed to Veterans Day to honor all veterans. So it was noted as a national holiday for years, all the time I was growing up, just kind of noted. And then it became a national holiday when the unions started getting holidays off from work. Then it just became another excuse for people to take a day off from work and get a paid day off of work. And that was kind of primarily all it was. You'd hear some platitudes from some businesses saying thank you veterans or whatever, but we'll be closed on whatever day Veterans Day was. It was finally settled back on November 11th again, I think in 1976 or something like that. Anyway, none of that makes any difference. Now it's November 11th, which is original Armistice Day, and it's celebrated as Veterans Day. Like I said, I never really paid too much attention to it. I grew up around men, manly men. Sounds kind of strange to say something like that, like something you'd see off of Saturday Night Live or some comedy show, but that's exactly what it was. My dad was woodsman, timber faller primarily, but he did just about anything he could do to keep the wolf away from the door, make a few bucks. And he took me with him in the woods from the time I was, well, even before I was old enough to walk, but from the time I was old enough to walk, I was with him in the woods around woodsmen, loggers, equipment operators, laborers, truck drivers, heavy equipment operators, and construction, road building and house construction. I was also around farmers, ranchers, just all kinds of, like I said, manly men that worked. And that was through a period of time when modern machinery was just kind of making its debut. A lot of these guys that I worked with had worked with steam engines and horses, and a lot of work was still done by hand. Most of the guys that I was around had all served in the military. Most of the ones in the early days in the 50s and early 60s were World War II veterans. A lot of them had seen combat. Guys had been in North Africa, Italy, Normandy. Some of the guys had been in the Navy, merchant marines, running convoys of ships going across the Atlantic, supplying the Europeans and seeing other ships sunk. Some of them had been on ships that had been fired on and sunk. I'd say other guys had been in the Pacific, Guadalcanal, Saipan, Iwo Jima, other places. I knew guys that had been in air crews, tail gunners, ball turret gunners, pilots, things like that, B-17s and other airplanes in Europe and in the Pacific. One of the guys in my later young life that worked for me was captured in the Philippines and survived the Bataan Death March, survived slave labor camps on different islands and stuff from the Japanese, was interred in a POW camp in Nagasaki in Japan, and he was there when they dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Said it was the second best day of his life. First best day of his life is when his daughter was born a few years later. None of those men ever talked much about their service. They just took it for granted because most people had served in the military. Many of the families I knew had lost family members in military service. Well, none of that was talked about. There was no celebrations. Veterans Day didn't mean anything to them. I came of age during the Vietnam War, and I knew a lot of guys that went to Vietnam, and I've known a lot of guys since that were Vietnam veterans. I knew guys that went over there that came back missing parts of their bodies and missing parts of their minds, and some guys that didn't come back at all or came back in body bags. Again, there wasn't much celebration for them. I know guys personally that were spit on, yelled at, called baby killers and things like that when they came back to the U.S. after being overseas in Vietnam. I was in the Air Force in the latter part of Vietnam. Actually, towards the end of it, I actually got transferred out of active duty into the Air National Guard. A reduction of force, spent 2 years active duty. I was stateside and then in the Air National Guard for 4 years. We were advised then not to wear our uniforms off base. Immediately next to the base, it was fine, but when we get away from the base to go anywhere, we were advised not to wear our uniforms because of the attitude people had towards military personnel in those days. So then after Vietnam, the military was pretty much dismissed. Nobody ever thought about it at all. And even during the first Gulf War, military wasn't really thought about much. It seems like after 9/11, then that started changing. And I've kind of been bemused to hear this. Thank you for your service when somebody finds out you've served in the military. That's not the experience most of the people I grew up with or knew later had. It almost seems like a platitude. It almost seems like something that's sad, like Gesundheit when you sneeze, or sorry for your loss when somebody has had a loss in their family member or a close person. It's something that people say when they don't know what else to say. In some places, there's actual feeling behind that. So here in Petersburg, a few years ago, I don't know how long it's been now, several years, high school students have started a program of honoring vets. A lot of these old vets from World War II and Korea are senior citizens now. Well, I guess we're all senior citizens now too, but some of them are in nursing homes, some of them are still in home. These high school students have started going to these individuals, these veterans, and recording their stories. And for the last several years, they've had a program on Veterans Day in the school where they've put on a program in the school for the veterans, invited them in and put on a program for them, showed some of these stories, honored these veterans. The local quilting club has taken up making quilts for veterans. They call it Quilts of Valor, and given them to some of the veterans. That's the quilting club, and some of the high school students have all been involved in that. A few days ago, my wife was contacted by one of the ladies in the quilting club and said that they had made a quilt for me. I was pretty surprised by that. So yesterday, they had a parade to honor the veterans, and because of the COVID, they asked all the veterans to get in their personal vehicles and line up, and they had a parade in front of the school. So we went up there and lined up with the rest of the veterans. We lined up in our vehicles and started a parade. And they had all of the kids in the school, went through the grade school with all the little kids in the grade school standing out on the sidewalk, waving flags and cheering, and the band playing, and then across the middle school and the high school with all the kids out there, and both the high school band and the junior school band playing. And then certain ones of us were selected for the Quilts of Valor. I was one of the ones presented with a quilt. This is the quilt. And this was made by the local quilting club and some of the school kids. And I gotta say, it affected me more than I expected. So this is the beautiful quilt that they give me. We've got stars and stripes. And even the quilting is done in stars and stripes on there. The last couple of years, I've kind of lost my tolerance to the cold, and when I come in at night, a lot of times sit in the chair, I'll be kind of chilly for a while. Eventually I'll warm back up, but I've taken to putting a blanket over me like an old fart and sit in the chair to get warmed up in the evenings. This is going to be a fantastic blanket for that. So this is the back side of the quilt, and it's just a solid red. And this is the plaque that was sewn into the quilt. It's personalized for me, and I guess every one of them are personalized for the person they're for. Made by Kathy Reamer, Mackenzie Larson, and quilted by Patty Austin. So I want to say thank you to the high school kids for their interest and expression of gratitude for the veterans, and for the quilting organization that made these quilts for all the veterans. It's not something I ever expected, so thank you all.
Beautiful.